right. Hi, everyone, again. Here we have Vito from the. Actually, I'm going to let him to introduce himself and the company as well. And thank you in advance, Vito. Please go ahead. The
Yeah,
floor is yours.
thanks, Meme. Hi, everyone. My name is Vito Mantis. I run a consulting company called Primordial Labs that specializes in generative AI, large enterprise grade um, computing, and also is related to a couple different startups that also work with those types of technologies. Um, and so today we're going to be discussing Google's recent I/O event and specifically their announcement surrounding generative AI. I thought it was an interesting presentation, and I titled the talk today, which probably just because my schedule is not as polished as it could be, but it is what it is. I titled the talk "Everything Everywhere All at Once" simply because I felt like, due to competition with other players in the field, Google wanted to show that they could step up to the plate and promptly threw generative AI in almost every product, which uh, was, you know, for developers great, but also it could be a little daunting if you're trying to figure out where to start. So we'll deal with just kind of an overview of uh, what is generative AI, what types of products did they release, what's the landscape, what can you use, how should you get started, and just look at some demos along the way. So, firstly, what is generative AI or Gen AI? Um, if you're not familiar with this, it is simply models that take some sort of existing situation and generate content based off of prior information. So the most famous generative AI right now are large language models, which take a sequence of tokens and predict the next token. There's also generative AIs that take noisy images and make them less noisy. That is to say, they make them more like your target. So you could take an image and say, make this look more like a dog on a bike, and it would make it look more like a dog on a bike. And you can actually repeat that process and arrive at an image that looks like a dog on a bike. And these, there's many different ways to train these models. I think currently the best overview of large language models is actually probably a speech Andre Karpathy gave called "The State of GPT," and that was actually at a competitor's event. So go ahead and Google it on YouTube. You can find it. It's really good. And he, for background, was the AI chief at Tesla for a while. So it's a really interesting talk, the state of GPT, and he talks about how there's a couple different stages of these large language models, which are really at their core just okay, what comes next, and then the next step was now let's get human feedback, just raw human feedback, and then more and more levels of fine tuning with human feedback. And it's really interesting. I highly recommend going to see. He also has a couple tutorials on backpropagation and just in general really knows the stuff and explains it in an easy to understand way. So I won't go too deep into it, but suffice to say that large language models are everywhere right now. And generally speaking, they look at preceding tokens and generate the next token. And um, if you think about what they're looking at, they are looking at a couple different things. Now, they used to be looking at just the preceding tokens. We can now also give additional context. And Google's also tying in things like data stores. But for the most part, they really are just looking at when we talk about all these different types of context that you can provide to these large language models, at the end of the day, they end up being fed into these models really just as preceding tokens. And so we'll go ahead and look at some of the available models that they've been working on. So they had Palm, and now they have Palm 2, and they've broken it down to a series of different models that are focused on different types of use cases, which if you think about it makes sense. You don't necessarily need the most performant model in all scenarios. So something you can tell the relative size of the animal represents its capabilities. So a gecko, although bison is, I guess, technically larger than a unicorn, but gecko can run on a mobile phone, and bison is kind of your general use case. And then I haven't had any experience with unicorn. I think it's coming soon. That would be kind of your magical, mystical large language model that can do anything. They also introduced Gemini at Google I/O, which was really interesting and sounds kind of like the beginning of the Terminator Overlords level model, in that it has now memory and planning. It can improve itself. It can use tools, is the idea, and it can include memory, because right now all large language models for the most part are stateless. So if you think about when you're having a conversation with these chatbots, you are not actually persisting any state on their side. Every time you send in a new message, it's being sent back to the model. So they're stateless, and that's actually a really big issue because of things like if you have really complex questions you want to ask, you want to give them a lot of information, but they don't have any way to persist context. Currently, it requires some sort of memory module, which is the next big thing. And they said that's coming next year. We'll see. And actually, a lot of the stuff during I/O that was presented, it's kind of a mix of available now and coming soon. So I do want to say I tried to put coming soon or wait list on the slides, but it can be a little confusing going off of I/O if you go back and watch the keynotes and things like that. What's available now? What is coming soon? So one of the first things they talked about was Bard. And if you haven't used Bard, it's a really fun tool. It's their just direct chatbot, right? It's the, let's see, I think it was March that it came out. And it was their first foray into a Google chatbot, and they've continuously updated it. And they announced some pretty big updates during I/O. One of which is, let me go back. One of which is that it now uses Palm 2, which means it understands more languages, can operate in more languages, can write code blocks, better code blocks actually now. That first was introduced a month or two ago, but now it's a little bit more competent. And something that's very interesting, it can now export to different facets. So it is actually context aware, which sometimes can be a little confusing when you get a result. Now, how come I can't export this? And sometimes I can export that, but you'll see able to export to docs, export to email, export to Colab, export to sheets. If you ask it to generate a table, it will now be able to export to sheets. But again, it's dependent on the format the data comes out. So sometimes if you're writing a coding request, it'll say, okay, now you can export to this Colab. And sometimes not, but in general, it does always give that copy paste option, which is convenient. It now understands 20 plus programming languages. Probably every programming language that you use, it can now program in, and it's pretty competent. It does have a pretty strict max length, so you really do need to sometimes keep working with it. And I think if you really want to use it for programming, you'd actually have better luck with the Palm 2. I think it's called Cody, but Bard does work. And I could be wrong about the name. I think I wrote later. There's some other different tools now that probably be more appropriate for it, but it is a good way to start out. It can pull in images into its responses. It can understand images. It can display points on a map, although I will say some of these features are coming soon. The maps, I could not make it currently create a map, but I think that's coming soon. And the ability to understand images is coming soon. But the ability to pull images into its results already exists. It can already format data in different ways, including tables. I think under the hood it's Markdown. And then they also announced a series of plugins, things like Adobe Firefly at I/O, which look really interesting and could allow you, based on the context of what you're asking, to shuttle it over to these plugins. And I think that you would select which ones, not that it would intelligently know which to use, but that remains to be seen. So another thing they announced were some enhancements to Vertex, and they opened it up much more broadly. So this is something that I've had access to. And I'm going to go ahead and quickly share my other screen so you guys can see what that looks like. So this is actually one of my test zones, and you can see all the different models that they've got, and it's actually really handy. So what's nice about this is you can just go in there and start working with it. So they've got, well, let me back up. So they've got their foundation models that they've trained, and you can see there's Cody for code completion, code chat, stable diffusion, BERT. They've got all the big ones here. The ones that you might play around first would be Palm 2 for chat or text. This one is closest to what you're probably used to, something like ChatGPT. So you can just go in there and start playing around. You can do something like you can do context clues, which gives a background to the model. And then you can provide no shot, which would be no examples, or you are a helpful assistant who likes to add their response. Let's see. This is the best way to start a journal. So you can just go ahead and shoot that over. And you can see rewarding therapeutic experience. I don't know if you can tell, but it would normally not be quite so opinionated. So it's a little bit more, it's a little bit more flair filled, I think I'd say, using French idioms. Let's see. So we can, let's see if we can get to, let's keep going. What is the best way to start a journal? So now if we're lucky, it looks like that might not be close enough to this context, but essentially you can provide clues on how the agent should respond in this context window. And then you can also add examples of what you're expecting. So if you were trying to do some sort of Jeopardy scenario where you wanted to provide an answer and have it ask the question, that's where you would train it using these examples, because that wouldn't be standard human behavior to do it that way. So then you could write those examples and then, type in the arch, and it would, come up with a question related to the arch, right? Which normally would not be the case, right? If you just typed in the arch and say, well, what?
Very interesting. So, Vito, do you want us to wait till the end of presentation to ask questions, or which way do you want us to proceed? Like if you have questions.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
All right. This looks really awesome. And I see that you can change the temperature and like adjust the parameters there as well. And then you can expose this as an API or something that you can call using your own code.
Yeah, so you can actually see the code over here, right, which makes it really easy. And you could pull that right into Colab. You could run it from your local machine. You could copy this into your own local environment or throw it into a workstation or something like that. So that is a great point.
That's awesome.
So that over there makes it very easy to understand. So you can see which, within the context of this particular foundational model, they've exposed two different models, and one is Cody, which is again more focused on code completion, and one is just general Chat Bison, which is focused on chat-based responses. So yeah, and then good point over here with your parameters. You can specify how many limits you want to use. Again, this affects your costs, and temperature, right, is how much variance, what types of probabilities are you looking at? If you selected a temperature of 0, that would basically mean just use the highest probability token coming after the current one. So you would get the same answer every single time. But researchers have found that by using higher temperatures, you get more creative results. And generally speaking, you don't want a temperature of 0.
Oh, that's awesome. Can you disable the safety threshold as well, or no? What are the options there?
So
okay, no.
I'll hover it. So this is they've started working on training these models to understand what are harmful responses, and they have a couple different models to do that actually. But I think by default it has a certain level of protection on there, but you can kind of you can limit just exactly how tight you want it to be. You know, what kind of liability you want to incur. But it's never. I don't think it's ever completely uncensored, because that goes into the base training of the model actually. Because Palm 2 is RLHF, which is basically it was trained using human feedback, so it already has some level of censoring in there, right? It's not just raw responses. And then, okay, so let's go back to the model garden really quickly. Continue. You can see there's a bunch of other models that are available, and these are all available today. So they're pretty good. So I'll go back to my other one. Your screen. Sure. So again, you can provide context. No shot would be, again, no examples. Few shot would be providing some examples. And then within Vertex AI, they also have ways to bulk upload many, many examples. So if you do have, you know, large data sets full of historical data of what types of responses you would expect in your conversations with the agent, if you're trying to build some sort of helper agent, you could put those all up to allow the model to learn more effectively. And you can do fine-tuning on your models with that to create a new model. Again, you can't fine-tune a model within just the context of a conversation. You always need to create a new model if you want to fine-tune, right? Because these models are stateless. So anytime you fine-tune, you're essentially creating a new model, or you're adding a layer in between. But generally speaking, you're creating a new model. The next thing they announced with Vertex AI that I'm really excited about, but I have been waiting for forever, is the Gen App Builder. And they talk more about this. This is essentially allowing you to very easily build an app with generative AI, and specifically the part that I'm really interested in, which is to tie this to a knowledge base, right? Could be unstructured, structured data from across different sources, specifically within Google Cloud itself, or some, you know, scrapers. And this one, they've been working on with partners, but they're really not sharing this yet widely. So I can't wait to get my hands on this, because this is a lot of projects I'm working on use this type of workflow, and I've had to do it all manually. So very exciting stuff. The other thing, and this is again goes back to the title of the talk, which is Everything Everywhere All at Once. They've also released something called the Palm API Maker Suite, which it also helps you train chatbots. And if you think it looks kind of like the Model Garden and Vertex AI API, you wouldn't be wrong. It looks very similar, but there is a waiting list for this. I don't think it's as tight as some of the other ones, but there is a waiting list for this, and you can do your few shot examples and then test your prompt design and things like that. So this is just another flavor of that, and this is Palm 2 as well. And then again, they talk about their chatbot design, and again, you can see it's ChatBison, and so I think basically this is kind of more of a guided workflow than the raw Model Garden under Vertex AI. I'm not sure if this is written on top of Vertex AI, but they did demo it, so I think it's just another way of doing the same thing. I haven't found a significant difference between this and Vertex API. In fact, I think if you're going to use anything, I would use Vertex AI, excuse me, because this seems a little bit more guided. So they also announced their code completion model Cody, and they explained that it will be available in Google Cloud Workstations and Google Colab. And I don't use Firebase a lot, but it will also be available in Firebase in a couple different flavors. So if you like Firebase, they do have these Palm 2 API integrations, Palm API, which is Palm 2 available kind of out of the box. There's a couple different SDKs available right out of the box with Firebase. And then they also announced, so if you're kind of like me and don't buy a local machine that often, and you want to just see what's out there, you know, you just want to mess around with your own models. Let's see, is this the right screen? No. Okay. They also announced the new A3 So this is A2, but they now have new A3 GPUs, and that allows you to run, your essentially your own GPU cluster, right? Which I don't think it's available for everyone right now, but already these A2 series are really, really powerful. So if you just want to run general machine learning workloads, then this is a good place to do it. And they're announcing the A3 series, which again I don't have yet, but you can see would be even better. So I wonder if it's just that I have the wrong one selected. I don't think so. That should be about as good as it gets. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that because it does look very expensive, but again, this would be running the entire month for $5.03 hourly. That's pretty damn good, right? That's pretty good. If you did this if you bought a machine to do this, which I've been looking at, you're looking at anywhere from 5,000 to 100,000 for a workstation, right? So this is a good middle ground. And let's go back and share screen. So back to there. So again, they also announced a lot of things that I want to just briefly touch on, make sure you guys are aware of, just because they're interesting. They announced Magic Eraser 2.0, some other photo editing features that Sundar showed off, and they're pretty impressive. They gave access to Help Me Write and Docs Sheets and quite a few Google products, and they do have Duet AI, Duet AI in Drive. They have generative AI in Search, which you haven't seen that. It's pretty good. I think it still has a ways to go, but I have been having good results with it. They are announcing Universal Translator coming soon. And they also talked about some of the struggles with AI security and understanding how their models were being used and will be used. So they announced some security measures that will be in place moving forward. Not immediately, but they are working on things like watermarking, so that you can understand if an image or content was created with their models. And I put demo here, but I don't really have to. Why don't we skip this demo? It's just looking at the generative AI and search results. So let's just skip it because I know I'm already taking a while. So how to get started with Gen AI. It's kind of simultaneously, everybody's interested, but not that many people are actually working with it. I think Google Colab's a great way to get started, right? Just open a collab session. It's pretty affordable, and you can just get started there. If you don't want to do that, you can get started locally with Python and LangChain and connect up to the Palm API, or you can play around with some of Hugging Face's models. But I do think the Palm API is a great place to start. It's relatively fast. It's pretty good. But if you did want to control your own destiny, you could download models themselves. And there are some free Google models, I think, on Hugging Face. Palm 2 is not up there. So if you wanted to run everything locally, you could do that. Vertex AI, as we showed, is great. I know a lot of people like Firebase. I don't personally use Firebase, but I have heard that it's great, and they did show off a lot of features and how to ways to use generative AI in Firebase. Google Workstations is kind of similar to Colab, but a little bit more featured, right? It's like an entire project set up, essentially a dev container in the cloud, and you can select what backs that, what type of compute you get, and then you can just use raw compute and then decide how to use it. And we showed how to get those GPUs, and you can use those however you want. So I think that's all I had, actually. For myself, I've been building everything locally using whichever model I want, and LangChain, and that's worked really well. And they do have support for LangChain directly in Vertex AI. And I know once they release the Gen App Builder that allows native integration with knowledge bases, that will make things very attractive to me. I have been testing the Palm 2 APIs, and they are very compelling. And I'd say they're much faster than a lot of the competitors. In my experience, they're not nearly as restrictive as something like OpenAI's offerings, which is a big bonus because it's very easy to get. It's very easy to get 429s over there. So that's a big plus for Google's, much more available. They both have some strong points. And if you're curious about which model you use for what, you can look at some of the leaderboards that are out there. But generally speaking, Palm 2 is really good. And that about wraps it up.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Vito. That was awesome. I personally learned quite a few interesting things, especially when you demoed the console, how to test the models with the Garden, AI Garden. Is it what it was called?
Model Garden. Yeah, Vertex AI Model
yeah,
Garden.
Model Garden. And you can access it by going through what was the main menu is.
I can drop it in the chat, but the main entry in the console is Vertex AI.
Vertex AI. Okay. Yep. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Do you want to speak a little bit about because we are featuring Vito's startup as well called Primordial Labs. Do you want to talk about that for a couple of minutes too?
Yeah, actually, I don't know what everybody's situation is, but we are hiring, and we are working with St. Louis area businesses to implement generative AI into their products. So if you think about anything that's heavy on knowledge bases and how to pull information out of those, that's what we've been specializing on so far. So if you have a knowledge base, historically you would search for information inside of that, right? But now we have the capability using generative AI to not just search through it, but also to pull answers from it, right? Which is really cool. So at a high level, what we do is we use matching algorithms to figure out what parts of your documents would be helpful in answering whatever question you might have. And then we pull that out and then send it to the large language model, right? Which can then generate very human responses based on the content that you provided. So it's a couple step process, and it's pretty amazing to see it in action. So I do think this is kind of the future of how everyone will interact with their knowledge base, right? You won't just search your documentation anymore. That'll always be helpful as kind of a source of truth, but you'll just ask for guidance on a topic, and the language model, it's not just the language model. The language model, again, you can't just throw your entire knowledge base in there right now because the context window is not big enough, right? I mean, you saw in the demo that you get, I think in Palm 2, the base, you get a little bit more than 1,000 tokens. So you can't just throw all your documentation into the single request. You do need to intelligently grab parts of the documentation and then pass it into the language models. But they are working on larger and larger context windows, and they're working on those memory modules. Again, that was really exciting when I heard during the keynote that they announced Gemini, because having that core memory is something that they've been lacking. You can replicate it by training your model on those knowledge bases, and there's some new techniques like LoRA that essentially take a very large capable model and actually prune it a little bit, but make it more specialized towards your knowledge base. And that works surprisingly well. So I do recommend people look that up. But you're essentially creating a new model, and you have to train it every time your knowledge base changes. So that is a little bit inflexible. So again, the ability to have kind of a source of truth that the model can answer off of, that's very large, would be extremely helpful. And that's kind of the next goal point for these large language models.
Awesome. I'm going to ask two quick questions. Pradeep, I know that, by the way, who was it? Somebody said thank you. It was Philip. He said thank you, and he had to leave. But two quick questions, and then Pradeep, if you have any questions, please feel free to chime in as well. The first one, I wanted to know when you talk about knowledge bases,
Mhm.
what are they? What format are they? Are they like they need to be formatted and in a package, and how you connect to them? The second question is, are the contexts in the model garden, is the context counted as part of the token in every single request, or is it like a separate thing, the token budget?
Yeah, yeah. My understanding is it's part of the token budget.
Okay, got it.
So, because essentially what they have done under the hood is they take the different types of input pieces of information for the model and then actually include prompts to those. And those are kind of pre-prompts to the actual large language model. That's my current understanding. And a lot of the enhancements you see on these language models really just boil down to adding pre-prompts to the actual user prompt. And then your other question was, what was it?
Knowledge base.
Knowledge base. Yeah. So this is actually why I thought that there might be a future in consulting on this, was because if it was super easy to connect a knowledge base to a large language model, I feel like there'd be no career here. But everyone's knowledge base is very different, and everyone has different levels of access, and that's essentially what I wanted to target. Was, these large companies have very complex knowledge bases and where it's stored and who can see what, right? So that's where I think consultants can get in there and make a difference. If you just have everything in Drive, there's already plugins, to essentially query Drive and pull relevant pieces out. So the knowledge base is any document storage. And then based on, what that document storage is, you do need to, that's the manual part of the work right now, right? You need to expose that knowledge base and build a system that will then go and find pieces of information from that. In my workloads that I've been using, let's say we have one project that scans through thousands and thousands of PDFs to try and find answers. We digest all those PDFs with an embedding API, create vector embeddings for those and store those in a vector database, and then query those in a follow-up procedure to get out what's likely to be relevant to the question, and then query the large language model with that information included. The GenApp builder that's coming down the pipe, my understanding is it takes care of a lot of that behind the scenes, and then you can write custom routines to handle non-standard knowledge bases. So we'll have to see. I don't have access to that yet, and they've kind of kept it at a high level in everything that they've showed so far.
Wow, very interesting. Thank you, Vito. Thank you very much. And let's see, Pradeep joined as well. Welcome, Pradeep. If you have any questions, feel free to chime in. If not, oh, by the way, Vito, do you want me to stop recording if you have something that you want to present outside of recording, or no?
Oh, sure.
It's up to you. All right. So I'm going to stop recording. Thank you, everyone who's watching later. See you later. Let's stop the recording.